Voice. I'm your host, Keith Parris. I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. Good morning, Debo. Good morning, Carver. Good seeing you all. Saw Debo over the weekend. Harvey, I didn't see you. Yeah, uh, yeah, I heard. You can't advertise certain spots because once people find out about it, man, it's a game changer. So you probably told a little bit more than you should have because, oh my God, man, it'd just be like I had saw the documentary on Freaknik. I don't know if you've seen it, yeah, but if you get a chance and how something starts off, really a generic kind of piece and it grows and grows. And then all of a sudden, whew, they have to shut it down because folks don't always understand um, what's happening. All right. You okay over there?
I'm good.
Excellent. We're joined in studio by Miss Diane Milner of the Alzheimer's. I can never say it right. Let me do it. Alzheimer's Association. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much. I am.
More. Yeah. Maybe turn your chair around a little bit. That'll help.
I am well. Thank you so very much for having me here
Last
today.
time I spoke with you, it was under a different hat. You were here talking about the directory you were doing at Marquette, right? Black Alive.
No, I was also talking about Alzheimer's, but I was talking about another event.
Another event, okay.
Yes, probably our Black History Month event.
Black History Month.
Yes, yes.
So tell us about the work that you all do there at the Alzheimer's Association.
Well, we are the leading voluntary health organization around brain health. So we work, we do support groups, we do educational programs, we fund medical research around Alzheimer's disease. So anything to do with the brain, pretty much, is where we sit in that space.
And there's research going on as part of your group, or you support research.
We support research. Yes.
How impactful, we talk about it a lot here on these airways, but just bring people up to speed in terms of how impactful this disease is in our community in particular.
Well, uh, in America, totally, there's over 7 million people living with the disease of Alzheimer's and other dementias. In Wisconsin, we have 120,000 Wisconsinites that are living with the disease of Alzheimer's or other dementia, and it hits Black Americans 2 times harder than it hits their white counterparts.
Is there, well, are there some of the causal factors that have been identified and what contributes to, we always talk about this disparate impact in terms of descendants of enslaved Africans?
Well, it has to do with a lot of different things, and we haven't pinpointed exactly. I don't like to blame the victim, but as with all other medical um, diseases, it hits the African Americans and Black Americans hardest. Um, Part of it is comorbidities. So if someone has, for instance, uh, vascular dementia, it is as a result of perhaps diabetes. So anything that affects the heart or the blood system or the nervous system is going to also affect the brain. So it's going to automatically hit us a little bit harder because of comorbidities.
And I differentiate when I said descendants of enslaved Africans,
Mhm.
because that's significant because we do have a significant African immigration population who's probably not dealing with the disparate impact, but it'll probably take a generation. Usually, we're seeing this with um, infant mortality,
Mhm.
where the rates are higher among descendants of enslaved Africans, but then African immigrants have the same birth outcomes as European Americans.
Sure enough, sure enough. And I think that, for instance, this is Brain Health Awareness Month.
Hmm.
And what we see is we encourage people to take care of their brains. So, descendants of enslaved Africans oftentimes may have incidences where we're not able to take care of our brains as well, because of trauma, because of diet, because of inability to exercise. All of those kinds of things may be what's affecting our ability to take care of our brains. We're now coming into the age where we're running more, we're walking more, we're exercising, we're eating more healthily. So those kinds of things will affect our healthy outcomes.
There's no known cure,
There is no known cure,
just treatment.
just treatment. And of late, we've come up with some treatments that are affecting us a little bit better. So they're delaying the onset of the disease if we catch it early. So again, with Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, we're encouraging people to participate in clinical trials. We're encouraging people to get early diagnosis. If you see those 10 warning signs or any one of those 10 warning signs, we are encouraging people to get your brain checked out. We have what's called mild cognitive impairment. So being able to uh, get early diagnosis, if there's a determination of mild cognitive impairment, there are treatments that can stave off the onset of full blown Alzheimer's.
You said that there were 10 signs.
10 signs.
Can you
Yes.
give me some of them?
I sure can. So, memory loss that disrupts everyday life. So many of us will say, oh my goodness, I'm having a senior moment. But if you have memory loss that affects your everyday life where you can't recall what you're doing, or you lose something and you can't retrace your steps on how to find it, that is a sign to get checked out.
Because as we get older, based on just all the information we accumulate over the years, there can be some memory situations. And I think sometimes I get frustrated because my recall isn't as quick as it was when I was obviously in my 20s. So things like that. But what you're talking about is very different.
It's very, very different because we all, of course, like you say, we have so much more that we're doing, so much more that we're trying to remember, and we're wearing so many different hats. You know, you're a father, you're a husband, there's so many things that you're doing. So that will cause you to, okay, where was I going with this? What was I doing? But that's not dementia.
Okay.
That's not it at
Yeah,
all.
because that happens on when I'm doing this talk program. Like, what was I talking about?
Exactly.
So we have memory loss.
Another one would be difficulty remembering familiar tasks.
Okay.
So something that you've done all the time.
Mhm.
If you're cutting the lawn and you always cut it in a diagonal, and then suddenly your wife notices that you're cutting zigzag, and she's wondering, okay, what's going
I'm in
on
touch
here?
with my artistic self. That is an artistic expression I'm doing there. It's nothing to do with I'm dealing with some onset of dementia. It's just
Okay, so if you cut it zigzag and then you just don't cut but one corner of the lawn, and
yeah,
you put
there's a
your lawn,
problem.
there's
There's
a
a
problem
problem. Yeah.
there. So
Yeah, because I think there are things out there which is just the process of aging, and I'm not trying to minimize this, but how you differentiate between what is just normal aging,
mhm,
right, and then now we're dealing with some things that are having a degenerate impact on your cognitive ability. And one of our cognitive talk about cognitive ability is memory,
exactly,
right? So,
exactly,
okay.
and that's the key. Some things are just a normal sign of aging, but whenever we get into, as I mentioned, things that you're doing that's not normal for you, and your family notices that, then that's when we have a disease, and that's when we need to get diagnosed.
Okay. Other
Another one
signs?
would be trouble understanding visual and spatial relationships. So uh, just not being able to understand that the door is right there, and wanting to get to the door, or wanting to step over something that's really not on the floor at all, but your vision is off and your space concerns are a little bit off. Another one would be misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps. Finding your keys in the freezer 3 days after you lost them.
Yeah. I think I'm such a person where everything has a place.
Hmm.
I think that would be probably easily identifiable for me in terms of because I hang my keys in the same spot. I put my wallet in the same spot. I mean, it's my ID. I mean, it's
Hmm.
but when that changes, then that might be a sign.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, but it's especially as we age, we at least I do. I become a creature of habit.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, I'm make sure everything's where I need it to be. But sometimes you may notice with your loved ones that they were also creatures of habit, and now suddenly they're not doing those same things anymore. So, another sign might be withdrawal from work or social activities. So, um, your aunt may have loved to sing in the choir at church, and now suddenly you can't get her out of the house on Sunday. She's refusing to go. She doesn't want to go. She has no interest in it. That's a sign. That's a sign. Another one would be challenges in planning or solving problems. Every once in a while, we'll make a mistake when we're balancing our checkbook or paying our bills. But if someone goes months and months without paying the electric bill and suddenly they're getting cut off notices, things like that, then you know there's a problem. Confusion with time or place.
Hmm.
So you go and pick up your aunt for church on Sunday and she's calling you on Monday, fussing at you because you didn't pick her up today. So confusion with time or place. New problems with words or speaking, not able to identify what that thing is that they put in their mouth, talking about the toothbrush.
Hmm.
So, confusion with words, decreased or poor judgment. That's why you find so many people that are victims of scams and things like that, because I think our scam artists must know these 10 signs and they pick up on one of them and then they zone in on the rest
There's
of
been
them.
some people who had some judgment issues since day one. So how do we differentiate between
It's
what
all
you've been
about the
doing,
brain health.
right?
It's
What
all
you've been
about the
doing,
brain health.
and how much of that is because, dude, you've been messing up for a long time. Okay.
I know some of those people
Oh
too.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Definitely. I think we all have a few of them in our
In our
families.
families, it's just like, is that the disease or?
Right, right.
Um, but yeah, I think the judgment piece is real interesting, and I think it's I have a fear now. I think because we've talked about it so much, I'm hypersensitive to man, I'm supposed to do this and I didn't do that. But there's a reason why we went to calendars. That we have to be able to write it down because it's just too
Absolutely.
much. Now, do you have some
Absolutely.
people with that? What is that called? Photographic memory that they're but even then, if they're being impacted by dementia, you'll see a change in them,
You
right?
will see a change in them. Yes. And oftentimes it's our biggest and brightest brains that get affected. And you're just devastated. It's like how? How did that happen? Um, but the other part too is I think that even with photographic memories, so often our technology may be what's affecting many of us,
Mm.
and we need to step away from the screen every once in a while and just give our brains a rest.
But what about would it also be an assistance to us too in terms of being able to stimulate?
It can be if we choose the right stimulation.
Okay,
Some things take us into a rabbit hole,
okay.
so it definitely can be an asset if we use it in the right way.
And a lot of this is a lot of this is neurological, right?
Yes,
Okay.
most
And the reason why I
definitely.
say that is because you can do a whole lot of things, but if it's a biological thing, that's pretty difficult to think you're not going to experience those symptoms or signs. It needs treatment then, right?
Right. It definitely needs treatment. Absolutely. Absolutely. Our last sign is changes in mood or personality.
Hmm.
And I'll just tell you a story. When I started taking care of my mother who had dementia, every once in a while, if I took some respite, if I had to go out of town or something like that, I would put her in a nursing home,
Hmm.
and just for the weekend, and then I'd come back and get her on Sunday. And they would always say, "Oh, Miss Sarah, she's so sweet," and it's like, "No, I'm coming to pick up my mother." Where's
Who's that?
who are you talking about? So, so they had, and she knew, when she could be sweet and when she could be,
Okay.
my mother. So, so yeah, those changes in mood and personality. And typically, she was a very, very sweet woman, but behind closed doors, oh
Oh
my goodness.
yeah, I know. People. Oh, you have the nicest mother.
Mm.
I need to show you some videotape.
Right.
you, you need to hear some audio tapes here
I
and
got
see if
some
that
audio for you.
right. If that's the same person. So if we see one of these signs, I mean, what is it? One, two, three of these signs, or the first sign that you should immediately go in and see what the situation is, or do we just wait?
Well, no, definitely do not wait. It's not a normal sign of aging. It is a disease. It is treatable. And now with the newer treatments, you have to treat it early. Otherwise, they won't be effective. So, what you should do if you're noticing two or three signs, talk to your doctor. Talk to your general practitioner if he or she wants to refer you to a neurologist for advanced testing. That's one thing, but talk to your doctor and let your doctor kind of mark where it is and maybe see if there's a progression or things like that. So yeah, start right away with your doctor.
Some of the things the Alzheimer's Association, do you provide information, education, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. We provide a vast array of education, things like education on the 10 warning signs. We have a whole hour educational class that talks about that. We have those educational classes are in person or they are available virtually. And our next virtual education class, I just saw that. Um, One of our medical specialists is doing a advancing the science latest Alzheimer's and dementia research on June 13th. Those are all available on our website, alz.org /WI, and you can access all of our classes. We also are leaders in providing support groups for caregivers or for those with early onset MCI, mild cognitive impairment. So yeah, there's lots of education and support in the Wisconsin, all across Wisconsin.
You're doing a couple events coming up. I know that just as an
Yes,
indication of some of the community work that you do.
absolutely, absolutely. As the director of equity and inclusion, I am doing a event here in Milwaukee this weekend. It's called the Unforgettable Weekend. So Friday night, we're welcoming Adrian Crutchfield, who was the last jazz artist to perform with Prince and record with Prince. So he will be here at the Market Center for the Performing Arts at 7 o'clock on Friday evening. And on Saturday, we're featuring a play, and it's called Unforgettable. It was written by Garrett Davis. Garrett wrote this play especially for the Alzheimer's Association. So here in Milwaukee, we're one of 10 cities that will be featuring the play in the U.S. So
Where's that's going to be held at?
they're both going to be held at the Market Center for the Performing Arts. And it's going to be a fun event, very welcoming event. However, we are celebrating a sold out situation right now. So, as of this past Friday, our numbers are just above sold out, actually.
Just above
Just
sold out.
above sold out. And it happens. We have a free event. It's free. Both events are free
Mhm.
to the public, and registration was required.
Okay.
And we did continue as we saw the numbers creeping up. We did continue to take reservations because sometimes when something is free, people may register in May and something comes up in June and they're not able to make it. So we didn't want any empty seats. So we do have just above sold out, but we're expecting that all seats will be filled on Friday and Saturday.
People want more information about the Alzheimer's Association. Is there a website, phone number they can go to?
Absolutely. Our website is alz.org. It's very easy. And our phone number, it's a 24-hour helpline. That number is 1-800-272-3900. It's available 24/7 in 200 different languages.
Miss Diane Milner of the Alzheimer's Association, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
You're listening to Community Voice. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
You're inside Community Voice on WNOV 860 AM and 106.5 FM with your host, Keith Parris.
All right, welcome back to Community Voice, and we have with us, she so graciously stayed a few more minutes with us, Miss Diane Milner of the Alzheimer's Association. That of Wisconsin, or just this is of Wisconsin. You talk about some of the other things you do. You have these two events that's coming up this weekend. What are some of the other events that you have?
Well, in my role as diversity outreach, I am reaching out into the community. So it's outward facing, making sure that I let people know that this is a disease and it's not a normal sign of aging. So one of the things that I do is in November, well, actually two things that I do. In September, October, I will do a pastor's summit. So I bring pastors together and talk to them about where Alzheimer's is hiding in their congregation. So often pastors don't know that one of their congregates or members has dementia until they're in the casket in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it helps us to get the word out to our congregations that this is not a normal sign of aging and that it is a disease and that it's treatable. In addition to that, just like I gave you the 10 warning signs of dementia, there are 10 signs of caregiver stress. And let me talk about those if I may. So often, again, this is because I talked about the pastors, I want to talk about caregiver stress, because when the pastor notices that our lead usher is not here anymore, or the person who loved to sing in the choir is not showing up anymore or can't get there for weeks at a time, that's a sign of caregiver stress. Oftentimes, and I talked about our 120,000 Wisconsinites that are living with the disease. And again, so many of them are African American. Those 120,000 people are being cared for by 205,000 caregivers. So that pulls people out of the workforce. It pulls people away from other, their side gigs and everything. It's very, very difficult. If we talk about the 10 signs of caregiver stress, the first one would be denial about the disease and its effect on the person who is being diagnosed. I think I did it myself. When I lived in Minnesota, people would call me and say, "Well, your mother's doing this or your mother's saying that." And I would say, "Well, that's just mom. She's going to get better." She had had a recent amputation, and I figured it was a little bit of depression from losing her leg.
She was
So
diabetic.
she would no, actually, it was vascular.
Okay.
She was a smoker.
Okay.
Yeah, she was a smoker. So I was in denial as a caregiver. I was a long distance caregiver from Minnesota to Wisconsin. Made a lot of trips here, trying to catch things before they got too serious. Another sign would be anger. Anger at the person living with the disease, or frustration that they can't do the things that they used to do naturally. Mom, how many times do I have to show you how to do this? In fact, I think I hear my kids telling me that now. Uh-oh.
Might be a sign.
But it's the simple things, your dad, he knows how to get dressed, and why is he buttoning his shirt up wrong every time?
Okay.
It's those kinds of things. And you feel like they're just being stubborn. They're not being stubborn. They forgot how to do it.
Well, and you know what? And I wanted to know, I'm going to use this word,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of this probably has to do with ignorance, right? And when I use that term, just not knowing or understanding. You think that it's rooted in that?
Yes, I think it is. I think that we don't understand. We don't. We just think it's a sign of aging, And we don't understand caregiver stress at all because, first of all, we don't even recognize that we're caregivers. We feel like we're just doing this for mom and dad, and we're just going to do it for a little bit and then we're going to get back into our lives. So, we don't recognize the stress that we're under as caregivers, and we don't realize that there's help for caregivers. So that's again where the Alzheimer's comes in. Being able to talk with your peers who are also caregivers and realizing that their story is very much like your story. Their mother is very much like your mother, and having a place to um, release the pressure and to talk about it and to find a, a safe place to express yourself. Another sign of our caregiver stress is social withdrawal. We talked about that as a sign with the dementia. It's also a sign with those who are caring for someone with dementia. The social withdrawal from friends and activities. Um, just, you know, it's almost like a apathy. I don't even care about my friends anymore. I don't care to visit anybody. I don't want to get dressed. I don't want to do any of that. And I remember feeling that way. I was singly focused. I didn't want to go outside those four walls. I'll just stay here. And I think that for instance, with myself and with many caregivers, we're sandwiched between generations.
Mm.
So when I moved here to take care of my mother, it was my mother and my 3-year-old son. So I was stuck in the middle, and both of them needed everything from me, from their head to their toe. So, of course, I don't have time for friends. I don't have time to take care of myself. I'm taking care of people who need me. Another sign would be the anxiety about the future, and that's so real. What's going to happen when they need more than I can provide for them?
Mhm.
When I moved here, I had a bad back, and my mother was in a wheelchair, of course, and we didn't have a ramp at the time. So I'm bumping her up and down the stairs to take her to doctor's appointments and things like that. And of course, you become almost depressed. What happens if my back goes out? Who's gonna do this? So it's again,
Are you your only child, or you have other siblings?
I am an only child in a sense.
Okay,
Yes.
because of the age difference.
Well, yes, and I was adopted.
Oh, okay.
And when my parents adopted me, they were much older. So I
Mm.
have three stepsisters that were much, much older. I just buried my last stepsister last year. She was 102.
Wow.
So yeah, my parents were much older when they adopted me. And when my father died in the 70s, we counted more than 36 foster children that had lived in our home.
Yeah, and I asked that question because family history
Hmm.
can also be. So when you say you were
Absolutely.
fearful, I
Right.
thought it was because of the genetic link.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I don't know what my genetic link might be.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's, but stress nevertheless, just wondering what the future holds. How can I take care of my mother um, at this? But I don't know my genetic link. So, and I am constantly aware of that. It's like, oh, okay, what's lurking?
Yeah, I mean it's it was interesting. My my cousin, my first cousin, and she was being diagnosed with cancer,
Mm,
and so she started making phone calls to different family members asking about our history, our
sure.
family history when it came to that. Um, and we were very fortunate because there was no in her immediate family where anyone had dealt with the
Mm,
type of cancer or dealt with cancer. So it wasn't necessarily genetic. It could have been, but so it's interesting. You need to know
yes,
as much as you can know,
exactly.
just because of medical history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I need to do more. My sons would like to know more, but
Okay.
you know, in time.
No,
In time.
I'm sorry. I just
No, no.
no, because I think we talk about epigenetics, particularly being descendants of enslaved African people, and things that we pass down. Now we know in many families there's a history, which means that there's a higher likelihood that you can contract the disease. just based on family history.
Right.
But then, as you said, then it's also, and you're not blaming the victim, there's also then lifestyle choices,
Mhm.
right? That
Right.
probably has nothing to do with genetics.
Sure enough. Sure enough. They say that as much as 40% of dementia is uh, attributed to modifiable risk factors. So again, going back to not exercising or smoking or drinking or trauma, head injuries, different things like that. So a lot of times there are things that we can do. So,
Caregivers, for many years, I worked in human services, and I saw this early on in my career and never thought, why don't you look it up? But we used to compensate people for respite
mhm,
care, right?
mhm, mhm.
And I would hear this, oh man, respite, until one day I had to go to a meeting and they explained respite. And then my mom um started caring for a developmentally disabled adult. And so her respite was that she would take her to a woman who would care for them.
Mhm,
And then when that woman went on vacation, she would bring that person over to mom. So they would
mhm.
provide that support, that caregiver
Exactly.
support. But it was important that they had that time away from it.
Very important. Very important. I mean, no less than when we work 5 days a week and we need the weekend off. Imagine caregivers don't get a weekend off.
Hmm.
So they have to be intentional about stepping back, stepping away from their caregiving responsibilities and taking care of themselves.
I don't know if this is one of the signs, but or you mentioned it. What about a higher sense of anxiety
You
and
know,
fear?
it, absolutely. I think we talked about that. Anxiety about the future,
Hmm.
but yeah, anxiety and fear about what happens when I can no longer provide the care or when they have behaviors. Um, as a caregiver, you live in constant angst about if I take her to the restaurant, is she going to have an episode? Is she going to forget her surroundings or not be familiar with the surroundings? And by the time we order the food, is she going to be ready to go? So it's those kinds of things. And so you live in a constant state of anxiety as a caregiver. Um, and again, our support groups can kind of help
And
bring you down off of the cliff.
some of this is, and I can speak for me, um, we like to have control.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that's your personality, but that's certainly my personality. If I can control my space, whatever I can control, I want to control. But a lot of times these things are out of our control,
Absolutely,
which can be
without a
very
doubt.
frustrating
Hmm.
based on certain personalities, right?
Sure enough, sure enough. I was fortunate to be caring for my mother at the same time that my girlfriend was caring for her mother, and she actually her mother used to live across the street from me. She was my godmother, and when I moved back home, I noticed that both mothers were exhibiting signs of dementia. So I told her, "Come and get your mama." I'm
Hmm.
not doing two mamas. You
Okay.
got to come get yours. But then we talked every single day on the phone. Once she took her mother back to Oakland, we talked every single day, morning and night. We did our check ins. And, that was a common theme among us. My life is not my own. We would laugh about it, but it took some of the pressure off. It's like a teapot that boils over and then it's calm again. But that was our little mini respite. Those times on the telephone, long distance, talking about our day, and talking about how hard it was to get our mothers to bed at night. Those kinds of things.
You were talking about the anxiety piece of
Hmm.
it. How much of it is, do you think there's a certain level of guilt there that some people might experience? Not being able to do all they can, not, somehow feeling responsible?
I think so. I think that if you're a caregiver and if it's especially of a loved one, your mother, your wife, your father, your brother, you do feel a little bit of guilt. Why can't I help them? Why can't what's going on here? Why can't I give them more?
Or if certainly a sib, why them, not me?
Yeah,
Um,
that could be too.
which depends on your sib. We
Better them than me.
right. I remember one time someone said she had been diagnosed with cancer, and someone close to her said that, I wish it was me. And she said, I was thinking, I wish it was too. Not me. So when she said that, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, I wish it
Exactly.
was anybody but me.
But me.
But it's
That's
me.
right.
You
That's
know,
right.
and
Yes.
but we have these thoughts, these feelings.
Mhm.
And I think when you were talking with your girlfriend, you were able to vent.
I was able to vent.
And
Yes,
she's
it
going
was
to
a
not
safe
be as
place.
judgmental because she's had the same
She's
experience.
in the same experience. Yes.
Right.
We would just be able to vent with one another on the phone. And that's the other thing too. As you were talking about better them than me, I remember talking to a friend of mine who had, and this is a totally different disease, but they had diabetes.
Mhm.
And they were saying that, out of all my siblings, I was probably the best one to get this disease because I know that I'm going to manage it better
Mhm.
than my other siblings. So sometimes we look at it from both sides of the fence. And I think I felt that way when I look at my foster siblings. One brother that lived here in Milwaukee, I tried to get him before I moved back home to take care of my mother, but he was just not equipped. He was not able to do it. So that's when I made the decision that I need to come home. Nobody can take care of mama like you can. So I made the decision that I need to do this. I need to be the one to.
Oh, and it's we've had other folks come in and talk about the impact of this disease and approaches to dealing with this disease. But when you start talking about caregivers, the one thing that and it was so apparent is that you love those individuals.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it and so that I don't say that complicates it, but that's another layer.
That is another layer, and depending on where you are, there's people that, for instance, with my mother, she was a smoker. As I mentioned, she lost her leg to smoking, and I remember being in a support group one time with the Alzheimer's Association. And I said, I'm fearful with my mother losing her memory that she's not going to remember to put that cigarette out fully.
Okay.
And they said, well, Diane, how is she getting the cigarettes? I go get them. I'm her daughter. She tells me to buy her cigarettes.
She wrote a note, sent me to the store.
Just like she did when I was little.
It's okay to give Diane these cigarettes, and then she would sign her name. Yeah, okay.
There you go.
That was one thing I never had to do. My mother was a smoker.
Oh.
But there was another trip I had to take that I did not like to take as a guy. Oh, boy, that man. Whew. And I was just saying, it's funny, the color of that box was like that color there, but and it never seemed to fit in the bag.
Right.
So now I got to figure out how to get from the store to the house and hope no one sees me.
Oh my goodness.
Making that run for my mom.
Oh.
But what cigarettes? Because I did have friends whose parents, would send them to the store,
right,
write a note, and the cigarettes. No, mine was something else. But
well, I guess that was a benefit of having an older mother. So.
Well, but if you're a girl making that trip, it's no big deal, right? If you a boy, dudes. You've had that experience? Yeah, that's a boy having to go to the store to have to do that. It was interesting in my family. My mother started menopause when my sister started her period. Oh my God.
Wow.
Emotionally, what that was like.
Incredible.
Oh my God. I was in the middle of this. It was just like, whoa, one coming in, one going out.
Yes.
But it's, if you've ever been into that. But some of you older brothers know what I'm talking about when she sent you to the store with the box and the box never seemed to fit. Yeah, Ferns could not have a bag big enough for that box.
Ferns? Oh, I remember that.
You remember Ferns?
Yeah.
I didn't know you were from that hood.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
yes.
they did not have,
Ferns.
and my mother, boy, whew, oh, gotta love her. So caregivers.
See, and that probably would have been the case with my father because my mother didn't drive, and my father
Okay.
did all the grocery shopping.
Okay.
So all the
Okay.
grocery shopping. In fact, that was one of the first times that I moved back home from Minnesota because when my dad died in the 70s, he taught me everything. He taught me how to write a check. He taught me how to balance the checkbook. He taught me how to pay all the bills. He forgot to teach his wife. My mother had never written a check in the checkbook. Never.
You say he forgot. He forgot. I think it's a little bit more intentional. Okay, Ms. Milner. Man, I always appreciate having these conversations with you, Ms. Diane Milner of the Alzheimer's Association of Wisconsin. Again, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
We're going to be talking again because there's a very, very major event you guys have coming up in November, right?
Absolutely. Yes, I'll be back.
All right. You're listening to Community Voice. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Oh, 6.5 Milwaukee. and South Community Voice on WNOV 860 AM and 106.5 FM with your host, Keith Parris.
Welcome back to Small Walking. Well, I tell you, man, you get to talking. Anybody been around here for any amount of time? Come to find out, we lived across the street from each other. Wow, on 4th Street. Yeah, that was actually when we moved on 4th Street. My mom and I lived. Gary was down south, and my mom and I lived on 12th Street. Then we moved to 2nd Street, and then we moved to 4th Street. Right. And I don't know, did you know W. Keith Reed, the DJ? Remember him back in the day? Yeah, Wilden. But Wilden was like my bestest friend. And I tell folks all the time that I've known James Turan, Attorney Turan, longer than anybody else in the city that's not a relative. He and I sat together in Miss Goins' kindergarten class. Why do I remember my kindergarten teacher? Because she held me back a semester. I'm one of the few people, Carver, you've ever met that flunked kindergarten. I flunked kindergarten. That should have been an indicator of what was going to happen with the rest of my life. But I was able to overcome it. Because then I was able to. We did 3 semesters in 2 when I was in the 6th grade. It was called 5T, and what it was that we did 3 semesters in 2. But yes, I did fail kindergarten. Thank you, Jerry Goins, for that. Now, she said, as much as I could understand it, well, I tell you, you can lie to a kid. Kids are so impressionable. And she said to me, well, Keith, I'm holding you back. She didn't say I'm holding you back. She said, you're coming back so you can help the other kids. Well, if I'm dumb enough to flunk, how you have me helping the other kids? That was so smooth, man. She was just like, you're here to help the other kids. And but it wasn't because of any cognitive things. I just think that and I'm a real big fan of early education. I think the earlier that we can get kids into an educational setting, the better our kids are. And I think about now, I was comparing that to my goddaughter, who was at a daycare, wasn't daycare, they were preschool, and just how at 4 years old, what she's able to do that I could not do at 4, right? I mean, where she can read, she recognizes her name, your name. It's just, and everything. It wasn't that I was a dumb child. It was just that my uncle and aunt weren't really about education. They just taking care of me, right? So let me run, let me play. Never thought it was important to learn colors, shapes, alphabets, all these things she knew at 3, right? And so I am a proponent of early education, and the more stringent the education, the better for the child. President Nichols, good morning,
How are
sir.
you?
I'm good. Oh, thank you. Good looking out, man. Good looking out. Thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm great.
Mr. Clarence Nichols, he is the president of the Milwaukee branch of the NAACP. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So how things going now?
Well, so, but we're working hard as usual. On the case, volunteering as usual.
You all, if I may ask, as an organization, and only because it's recent, were you did the NAACP take a position on the MPS school funding referendum?
Yes, we did. We voted in favor of that referendum because it's necessary. It was needed based on Milwaukee impoverishedness. We're the most impoverished school district in the state of Wisconsin, and we're not receiving the revenue that we should be receiving from the state. That's interesting because we put out the largest amount of tax dollars in the state, but we're not getting the proper return.
Has the NAACP, based on the information that's come out now, in terms of some of the challenges that MPS is facing, Have you all taken a position on where we should go from here, or how this situation should be handled?
Well, I guess I should say to you that the annual revenue for MPS to run its school system is $1,210,952 million, right? So with that, we know that a large amount of the monies are used for instruction, are to be used for instruction, and to support services and other expenses. Now, there's a budget outlay that many people have not been familiar with and have not been made abreast of. To give you an example, as early as February or March, the organizational chart for the budget could have been put in newspaper or given to you even to know what are they looking at in terms of an outlay for the budget. Then if you move to later February, the staff of each school is looked at and determine whether or not, they call it FTEs, full-time equivalent staff, what's necessary to staff that particular school. Now, that's given to the administration from that school. And it's interesting because also at that school should be what is called engagement counselors or an engagement council. And they will let the administration know what the needs are for that school, resources for the students, etc. Now, that's supposed to be done on a regular basis. You move also to the district budget financial balance. Now, how can they balance that budget with the total amount of money, the billions that I already cited, or $1 billion? And then they begin to look at what increases or decreases that particular school will have to face based on the monies they have in the budget.
Well, one of the things that I heard at the last board meeting, there's a group out saying that they need to change the formula, going to a equity-based formula, where it's based on the needs of that school and not so much based on a population, right? Because you can send resources to a school based on the population, the needs are not as great as a school with a smaller population, but because about 22% of MPS's student body is special needs. And if that's concentrated in a particular school or a particular school district, that means you need those resources to address those needs, right?
Now, excellent point. But notice this, right? We're at the point now where we understand that the state is going to be holding back resources for that particular population. Now, if you know that they're in need, why would you hold back on such a population?
Couldn't the onus also be on the system, knowing that it is such a need, that what you need to do in terms of the required paperwork gets in on a timely and accurate basis, right? So part of that is the state, but it's also part of that is MPS.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that, because you have to remember what you just said. Part of is on the state, part is on MPS. The state collects data from the school system, so they know what monies they have and they know what their needs are if you go according to the Department of Public Instruction, and we often say DPI. So that's the state superintendent looking at what the school needs are in a specific district. But let me make this point, because since we're talking about the state superintendent, let's look at the governor. All right. The governor is over our Constitution. And the Article 10, Section 3 states all school districts are to be administered as uniformly as practicable. Now, that's practicable being lawful. So, what should have been the law governing that particular school district or Milwaukee school district to say that we see that this is happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, we're going to what? If need be, give you the assistance that's needed because it's evident you can't do it yourselves.
Well, let me ask, what if we knew what we knew prior to the revelations, would the NAACP still been as supportive of that referendum? If you knew what we know now, if we knew prior to the vote.
Now, when you put it that way, I'm a former school teacher,
Okay.
a retired teacher.
Okay.
I was in the system for 40 years.
Okay.
Now, you said, if we know what we know now. Well, let me tell you what I knew before.
Okay.
Look at this. I am from Charlottesville, Virginia. All right. So in 1954, I was 10 years old. Brown versus the Board of Education. This year, it's the 70th year of Brown versus the Board of Education. It has not been overturned like Roe versus Wade, right?
Well, I think it's also practically, have we achieved what Brown, and again, the NAACP is very instrumental in that Brown decision, have we achieved what the Brown decision did, which was to desegregate schools and to make sure that, and I don't even think they used the term equity, but and I know we know the difference between equality and equity, that separate but equal was unconstitutional, and the very negative impact it had on Black and brown students, because we talk about descendants of enslaved Africans, but they were dealing with the same issues in Texas or in California where they had large Hispanic populations. So I'm just, when you think back on where we are, and some might argue, and I try not to use hyperbole, but some would argue, well, we're just as bad as we were then. In some ways, I think you can make that argument just based on progress that we're trying to make as a people.
So I'll go with equity in the sense of not being perpetuated or never has been.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. When you say the NAACP has been involved or could have been involved or should have been involved, Honorable Lloyd A. Bobby, who was the representative defending the NAACP in what it was called in 79, a desegregation effort. But you have to remember now, in 1979, that was called a school desegregation settlement.
Mm-hmm.
It was out of the federal court. John W. Reynolds, the judge, federal judge, allowed the Milwaukee Public Schools and the MTA to settle on what was a de facto or socioeconomic status agreement. Now, let me say what that status agreement was. Honorable Lloyd A. Bobby filed that lawsuit based on 10 middle-class kids whose parents were willing to take that step. They could afford to take that step and try to make the school system a better school system. That out-of-court settlement said, these children in this settlement, this federal settlement you're trying to make, are middle class. They're not lower socioeconomic group children. Therefore, you can only settle with the middle class agreement that we would make with you. And what was that agreement? It was between, again, the Milwaukee Public Schools and the MTEA. We lost out.
Because those who grew up here understood we used to have the district. And so the elementary school, the middle school, or junior high schools then, and then the high school was based on the district that you lived in, right? I mean, I went to Parkman, but I didn't live in the Parkman district. And so I guess the statute of limitations is up. My mom used someone else's address for me to get in. That's just how stringent that district system was. But what it did was it perpetuated segregation.
Yes.
Right.
Indeed.
And so, when we're looking at it now where the majority of the student body is Black or brown, but I think we have to factor this in too, the impact of poverty on MPS, because those parents who have the wherewithal to send their kids to a private school or can move into a district where the schools are better performing, but there are a lot of people who are trapped and stuck, and now they're really at the will and power of MPS.
Correct. But let's go back to the budget.
Okay.
So we're nearing now June 28th. But of course, the budget is not in. It's not where it should be at this time because of what has transpired around the budget.
Okay.
So it may not be June 28th at the latest. Now it'll probably be in July. But what happens? The budget is transmitted to the Common Council. The controller for the city of Milwaukee is the one who sends monies out to the administration based on line items requests. But let me go back to the Common Council. And let's go to what you just said about you going to Parkman and how things have changed. Let's look at the change. So we have an alderman over what is called the 4th district. Parkman is in the 4th school district. And if I use the name Aisha Carr,
Okay.
you recall that was her district. Okay. Now, notice this. There are several feeder schools to Parkman.
Or
Elementary.
or Douglas now.
Oh, Douglas.
Yeah.
Yes, because you said Parkman. Excuse me.
I said Parkman because when I was there was Parkman, is Douglas now. Those of you went to Jackie Robinson, but there was people went to Peckham, right? So, right, you know what I'm saying? So we got to adjust.
All right, we got it. Now, all right, and we're told that Douglas is to feed into North Division.
Oh, not King anymore.
No, it was North Division because that's the 4th district high school.
Well,
all right, and then you have the other schools, and I know the elementary schools.
Okay.
So there's several that were to feed into Douglas.
Right.
All right. Well, let's say you're the alderman of the 4th district. Shouldn't you know what the budget is for that district? Because you oversee that district for its needs. Should you not?
Yeah.
All right. So that's another entity that could be involved and should be involved. And we're going to ask that they be involved. Each alder person should be involved with his or her district to help what? Improve the schools in their district because they oversee the district for its need as an official. Is that correct?
Right.
All right. So keeping that in mind, you can't hold one person accountable. Look at all these entities I just talked about.
Well, everybody has their level of accountability. If you're the fact that the superintendent resigned, we know that if you're at the head of the table and there's a situation, whether you're directly or indirectly responsible, you are responsible because you're just the head of the table, right? Okay. So, I mean, it would have been very difficult for Dr. Posley to hold on to his job just because somebody got to answer for it. And it's usually the person at the top. They're a little bit easier to fire than you have a person who's a civil servant who's sitting there who could be responsible for a lot of the issues that you have because they have civil service protection and other things. So, I mean, I understand that. I don't know how personal it was. I think it was a business decision, but after everything came out, it would have been very difficult. I think the community outcry would have been such that they had to show that somebody, and he was the sacrificial lamb.
Okay, so that's him, but it didn't stop the
There,
budget
there you go.
because I'm dealing with the budget.
Okay.
Now,
Now let's get back to that.
all right.
Even then, my wife went to one board meeting where they were supposed to discuss the budget. Very difficult to find the budget. I went to the board meeting that we just had last week, and again, it was there to discuss the budget. So just from a parliamentary perspective, President Herndon, anybody got up and talked about anything other than the budget was out of order, because that's what you said you were there for. Now, I understand they wanted the community to be able to vent, but we still didn't have the discussion about the budget. You know, maybe 2 or 3 people spoke to the budget. Everybody else got into either support of or opposition to the school superintendent, but we never had that discussion because the budgets weren't readily available.
I was one of those persons that attempted to discuss the budget. And in discussing the budget, I knew that the referendum dollars, the 252 million, were not incorporated into this year's budget.
Right.
All right. Now, if you go over the 4 years, the budget is to provide, not the budget per se, but the referendum dollars is to provide support for the budget. That would be $60 million a year. Now, in terms of one of those years, I thought that $20,000 could be set aside in a fund to send 20 school students in the district, Black and of color, to the college of their choice. They will come back, work 2 to 3 years, whatever the settlement is if they do a contract, and it'll be a wash if they met the agreement. It would also guarantee you that in a decade, you would have 200 more kids, Black and of color, than you have now, because there's a shortage of teachers. When you look at the ratio, you already made
So
it.
you're saying that they would get the money to go to study education?
Yes.
Okay.
The college of their choice. But then it would also, as I said, increase the ratio from Black to white in terms of looking at the majority being students of color. When I came in, I said to you that I was a former teacher, retired teacher. I came in 1970. 500 of us came in at once. That made the ratio 8 to 1. 8 whites to every 1 Black, person of color. All right. Do you know what that ratio is now? 15 to 1. How did it not keep in steady pace with what they were supposedly doing?
I think that's generational. I think that many people, certainly I'm at the end of the baby boom, but certainly those folks who are in the boom, and even prior to that, the fields that seemed to be available to descendants of enslaved Africans was education. And there were a lot of people who saw the importance of education as it relates to children, but I think now you don't see as many Black students who are going to college saying, I want to be a teacher, because there's these other things that they can do. So I think that contributes. But my understanding is that NPS still has one of the highest ratios in terms of Black teachers. It's something like 16%, 15%. I think the last time we had this discussion, I had it with Dr. Posley.
No, it's less.
Less than 16%?
Yeah, I said when I came in it was 8, and it's gone down.
Okay.
So a perception is there that we do, but we don't.
Okay.
And then you look at the classrooms, they're overcrowded.
Yes.
Too often in too many schools. But now, what was the budget priorities for this year? It hasn't changed. I'll give you an example. It was to increase academic achievement and accountability, improve district and school culture, develop staff, ensure fiscal responsibility and transparency, strengthen communication and collaboration. That's still open. So it's necessary for us to begin to look at that. But let me go back to the first one, the one that says increase academic achievement and accountability. So that means reading to prepare all students to read at grade level. Writing to prepare all students to write cross curriculum and disciplines. And then mathematics to prepare students starting in kindergarten to get ready to be successful in algebra.
So you taught for 40 years. I've been in a large bureaucracy. There's a certain culture in that bureaucracy. Do you think that part of why there's a struggle to educate our children in particular has a lot to do with the culture that's in the NPS?
I'm going to say impose culture. Okay. Watch this. And we as residents of the city of Milwaukee have to look at this carefully. So in 1993, there was a revenue limit put forth, and it was called under Act 16. Act 16. Now, it determined how much money a public school system could receive to maximize the educational funding for resources, et cetera, for the school system. Notice this. Just last year, Act 12 came into existence. Now, you're looking at legislatures playing a role here. Mm-hmm. What did Act 12 do? Act 12 says you can only use your tax dollars, but you can increase your taxes 2%. But they can only be used for what? Police and firemen's pensions. So what happened to full job growth or employment, inflation, or economic growth? You're stifling us. You're stifling us in these particular acts. This is the state doing this. And then you're not sending the revenue that should be sent to the district. And you've already agreed we're the most impoverished school district in Wisconsin.
But I guess, but we're having, part of why we're even having this conversation now is something that wasn't done by the school system. Now, I wish, and maybe I missed those meetings, that people would come and basically want to burn the place down when we're looking at a 15% proficiency rate in reading. Seems to me that's the meeting that we should be asking a lot of questions in terms of what's going on. I mean, are we blaming the kids? Is it the teachers? Is it the system?
Now, you have to look at the school board now, the entire school board. All right.
Everybody's looking at the school board right now.
I know they're looking at them, but we need to get involved to talk to them, collaborate, as they put it. Right? Our collaboration and our partnerships need to be now in order to actually save our children. We can't look at what has happened. We have to look at now, and we have to look at the future. We're listening to legislators, state legislators, saying, hold back the money. Hold back the money.
Let's talk about that.
All right. Okay. What's going to happen if you hold back the money? You're already impoverished.
It seems like a circular firing squad. You're listening to Community Voice. We're joined in studio by President Clarence Nichols of the Milwaukee branch of the NAACP. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Milwaukee. You're inside Community Voice on WNOV 860 AM and 106.5 FM with your host, Keith Parris.
Welcome back, and we're having a conversation with the president of the Milwaukee branch of the NAACP, Mr. Clarence Nicholas. I'm doing your name correctly, right?
Yes,
Nicholas.
you are.
Okay.
And
Because it could be Nicholson.
no, it's Nicholas.
Nicholas.
Just like Saint Nicholas. I'm not a saint though. Nicholas is the one. Nonetheless,
But we were talking about this, and I'm kind of, they just sent me some questions. But I think first of all, I appreciate your candor about this. You're saying that there's a lot of blood on a lot of hands, and that at some point, what accountability looks like will be how people will respond to the level of responsibility. How do you feel about the mayor has come out and said that he's not in favor of a takeover? What is the NAACP's position in terms of should there be a takeover or of a different group of folks coming in to run MPS?
if you look at what the mayor said, I agree with him. But I'll go back to Mayor Tom Barrett, who ushered in such a takeover as a possibility. But then you look at him, he was a former congressperson. He knew what kind of federal aid was coming into the city as well as the state. Then he became mayor. Mm-hmm. So he has a operating knowledge of the school system per se, right? And a good knowledge around budgets. He was good in that sense. But he saw that, no, it should not be. And I feel the same. But if we go back to what I mentioned about the referendum dollars, so we need a good PR person. And not only a good PR person, but we need to invest $10 million in ethnic studies and civic engagement projects to help make sure that we get certified teachers, all right? And that the board is able to go through training and ethnic processes that will benefit the entire school district. They can use retreats, meetings, and other opportunities to inform themselves of what's best for our children.
And you're basing this on a letter dated June 17th?
Yes, but I'm sent to President Marva Hearn and the interim director of governance, the clerk. This is an ask.
Right, and this is based on what you see as budget items that should be addressed.
Yes, and there's more. Now, we wish to have a meeting July 20th at 11:30 at 2747 North Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Drive to have people come in and let's talk and let them see what the budget process looks like so that in the future we can prepare ourselves to be better overseers of the budget. Some people may want to try and have the MPS people, board, administration, have a community budget entity so that the community would know what's going on.
It was a comment that the mayor made in terms of he thinks more people should vote in these type of elections. So basically, if you look at the turnout for school board elections, it's usually 12 to 15%. And I'm sure if we did a deep dive into the numbers, we find out that many of the people who have students, many of the parents who have students in MPS won't even vote in that particular election. So do you agree with the mayor where he says that more people need to vote in this type of election?
Yes, more people need to vote in all elections. And I'm also looking at what's on the floor in the Senate of the United States, where we have the John Lewis bill that will prevent any types of interference in people voting, and to put out more information onto why you should vote as a person living in the Milwaukee community.
I always hearken back to any of us who've done any kind of political work will know that Tip O'Neill had a famous saying that all politics is local.
Good.
And the most local election is school board.
Thank you.
I mean, that is the most. Then, you work your way up to alderman, county supervisor, obviously judges. But this is something where you're talking about participatory democracy. This is right on the ground level. I think the other piece of it is, and maybe a lot of people is not aware of this, there's a group out there called ALEC, which is a very conservative legislative group. And one of their approaches was that they were going to take over school boards, right? Local kind of. Now, in this instance, our school board seemed to be dominated by MTEA-backed candidates. But the point is, people see the importance of that local body. And again, the budget at MPS, I think, is bigger or is as big as Milwaukee County's budget. So we're talking about a significant amount of money that people would want to be able to get it in control.
Yes, and you know that the per pupil cost is close to $16,000 per head. And there are a lot of...
Well, that's because of the referendum. Referendum put it up to 16,000. I did a little math on it.
Right.
Well, actually,
but that's what makes it big,
right? But that, because now, if the referendum, and depending on what it's going to look like with the money, but based on that, projected per cost for student goes from about 13,000 or 14,000 to 16,000. And I didn't realize this. Racine does the highest per pupil expenditure, something like 16,000, and based on public policy form, they're saying that's where Milwaukee is going to be now. But we have to factor in what is the special needs student body ratio in Racine unified as opposed to Milwaukee.
Correct.
And because a significant amount of cost, and a lot of that money comes from the state, obviously comes from the federal government to deal with our special needs population. But that's significant when you look at, and it has an impact on performance too, as it relates to what the students are going to look like on, here's a big word, on an aggregate level when we're bringing everybody together, come out then with the average.
And I like what you just said, because look at this. We were dealing with our state, and if we deal with our state budget, we have a surplus of how many billions of dollars. So if we could cure the needs in terms of factoring in the funding for a school district per year.
But how do you respond when the state says, oh, you want more money, but you're not being very fiscally responsible? How does MPS, or how do people who might be supportive of MPS and certainly increase in revenue, how do you make that counter argument back to the state when they're going to raise that?
Well, we need to put people in positions that are fiscal responsible. And a time to do that is now. We're back to now. Find the person who can manage such a budget, a person who can run such a large school district. And we're on our way. But we're still dealing with our children who are in need. But let me go to this before we end. Milwaukee branch NAACP will be celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, October 18th. And we'll be at the Barrett Center, and everything starts at 5 p.m. I want to make sure everybody knows that, because we need the support, and we want to continue to be an advocate for the Milwaukee community. And you keep in mind what we're talking about. We'll go back to what Dr. King told us in 1963. that there are 5 essentials to a healthy community. 1 would be education, 2, employment, 3, housing, 4, healthcare, and then social justice. We are not healthy here. We're talking about an education system, 1, that's in need of repair. We must do everything we can to possibly repair the system that's partially broken. It's not broken. We just need someone who is able to work with the community as well as the school board and administration to make sure the kinds of things that the budget calls for are done.
You know, again, a person who has worked in a large bureaucracy, I understand one of the things that it was just almost intolerable was that we didn't do things on time, and certainly we didn't do them right. There's usually a heavy sanction for that. In terms of the culture that's there, I mean, you taught for 40 years. When you say you're going to change, it's very difficult where people, there is a status quo that happens. And so when people come in and say, hey, you might want to look at this differently, people pushing back going, no, this is how we've always done it. But not get in the way. And the analogy I was going to use was I remember coming home from work one day and I walked in the house and I'm smelling this odor. And as I kept moving through the house, the odor is getting stronger. So I checked the sink. It wasn't the sink. I checked the garbage. It wasn't the garbage. So I get upstairs and 2 god kids, they were little kids then, they were playing. And as I went in the room, I'm going, Rhonda, do you smell this? She's going, no, smell what? Smell what? Well, my godson had one of those radioactive bowel movements. And I said that a lot of times you're in the middle of something, you don't smell the stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, it's stinking to everybody else but you. And I wonder, has this been a wake-up call to MPS saying that, you know, you might want to look at doing things differently? And how much, and so this is I guess this question, because I know the mayor says that he wants to be involved with the selection of the next superintendent. How important will that next superintendent be? Or something I think you alluded to, maybe we need to look at the board.
I would say both.
Okay.
But when you look at status quo, for instance, a person coming into a situation, if he or she is committed, they will try to do what's needed. In some instances, as old Malcolm X once said, by any means necessary. Well, we don't want to be that. We can't model Malcolm X per se because of who he was and what he had at his disposal. But a person that is committed will fight for what he or she believes is just. And I'll give you a good example. So if I use myself, so after 12 years working at Jackie Robinson, or Peckham, as you
formerly known as Peckham,
I moved out. All my credentials and payroll and everything was connected to Peckham, Jackie Robinson. Mm-hmm. I was in the field working to bring kids who had dropped out, because they were at that time in 82, they were dropping out by the 15,000. And I wasn't getting any invitations to graduation. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to see what was going on. So I began to work with at-risk kids. So for the next 28 years, I'm working with kids who are teen parents, dropouts, youth gangs, and students who are behind 2 or more grade levels, reading, math, science, and language. We had a success rate of good 85%, working with 100 students per year. Why? The commitment was there. We were also able to use monies to make sure they had a breakfast every morning. All right. And
thank you, Black Panther Party.
And social activities where we have on holidays, a meal where we invite the parents, friends, and household members. It made a difference. We're now looking at what we were saying. The students are not even interested in the lunch they have. So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's sad.
we were
We got more money than we ever had.
We had, yeah, because everybody talked about the lunch lady, but I remember the school lunch ladies were actually that. As a matter of fact, we had, I know, at least one member, maybe two at Metropolitan who were actually lunch ladies. And again, and kids have been complaining about this food here. That was something like when I was a student, and you would have started teaching when I was middle school.
1970.
Yeah, I was middle school. And one thing you never complained about at MPS was the lunches back in the day.
All right.
You never complained about the lunches. And I really appreciated the lunches when I went to Catholic school because everything was a la carte. And the only thing I seemed to eat there was a sub or their fish sandwiches. Catholics, great fish. But I missed MPS's lunches. I do work with fathers, and we play a game called Child Support Jeopardy. And we do this thing called Milwaukee Unique Things we say and do that's unique to Milwaukee. And so the first question we ask in that category is, what is MPS's most popular non-poultry lunch? Mock chicken legs. It is. So I heard people talking about, there was a lady at the meeting, at school board meeting, who was talking about how that is changing. And I think, again, Parkman/Douglas was a central kitchen. So basically they would cook for Parkman, and then I think some of the elementary schools, Keefe Avenue, some of the other schools. But the lunches were off the chain. I mean, it was, oh God, they had great lunches. And every time I get to people, we get the but now because of budget things, and then I think also the whole nutritional piece that they throw it in there, that these are nutritionally better meals. But the kids are going like, oh man, it's a different world. But that's important.
Yes, it is.
I think that's important because, again, we're talking about breakfast in the school, and I shouted out the Black Panther Party because the Black Panther used to do that free breakfast, free lunch program, even, before the federal government got in, and the Department of Agriculture now. So now you see free lunch, free breakfast, the breakfast programs in many schools.
That's good.
So real quickly, as we finish up here, do you see a way forward?
Yes, I do, because if we deal with it now and we get involved, and I'm saying we, so that means community people, we have to get involved if we want to help our children. Now, I'll give you a good example. Boston was turned around because during the time I came in, Boston was under the desegregation efforts, and it was terrible. All right. They turned it around because businesses, you had corporations, you had community members interested in what our school needs are, what our children's needs are. And we have a good example of what our children's needs are. Now, the trauma program has increased in terms of its need. So there's a need there. And if we don't provide for it,
that's going to be cut.
Well, it doesn't have to be cut if we demand that it's not cut, and use what? The referendum dollars, some of those dollars, to make sure that it remains. Now, why would you cut something you need?
Well, there was something that a young man said, and just looking at what the allocation would have been, because it's phased in. You don't get the whole 252 right up front. And the young man pointed out that they had, school board had voted on a new math curriculum. And he said, I defy any of you to tell me what is the name of that curriculum. And they spent $24 million.
Right.
And that's a significant piece of money that's coming in. And so there are questions that they're asking. As you were talking, I was thinking, for some folks, don't show up for the fight. Show up to fight for what is best for our children, because a whole lot of folks was down there for the drama,
right?
And 2 weeks from now, when the passions dissipate, the question is, and you just said this, if you're committed to something, you're going to fight for it. And so I think that those people who said that they're committed to this, You find out this is going to be a long fight. It's going to be a very difficult fight. I was talking to someone last night, and we were just talking, and she was saying, I don't see why they don't see they. And she kept speaking in plurals. And I said to her, because it's all the eyes in the room, very, very little we. I got this agenda, I got this agenda. And then the collateral damage in all of this are young people.
Now, at one point, we must decide, are we going to support our youth or not? Now, I go back to Reverend Martin Childs. He often talked about an
Former teacher.
Yeah, African folklore or African proverb. Or, either way, it was a saying. How are the children? And he always said, they should say or ought to say, the children are well.
Right.
So if we ask ourselves, how are the children? Then we need to begin to do something to make sure our children are well.
It's interesting. You had mentioned early in the conversation about Brown versus Board of Education. That was about the children.
Yes.
And I think you're saying it's still, I believe this, it still should be about the children. And let us do what's in the best interest of the children and not so much in our own self-interest.
We have to take a vested interest in the school system for the well-being of our children. And that vested interest, it may be, if we revisit Brown and look at all the particulars that were not dealt with, we may find ourselves moving faster ahead than we thought.
President Clarence Nicholas of the Milwaukee branch of the NAACP. Thank you, sir. You guys have an event coming up? I don't want to get out.
Yes, I mentioned it, but I'm glad you. No, let me reiterate. So, on October 18th, 2024, at the Barrett Center, we are celebrating our 100th anniversary of the Milwaukee branch NAACP. The event starts at 5, and we would like everybody to get a ticket to support us, or purchase a table, or become a sponsor. All these things will help us to stay in the fight. We have to continue to advocate for our children, but not only that, those 5 essentials: education, employment, housing, healthcare, and social justice. That's our mission. Equity in all those areas.
Mr. Clarence Nicholas, president of the Milwaukee branch of the NAACP. And this will be second Mondays, right?
Every second Monday of the month until October
18th. Big day. All right, man. Appreciate you. Always good speaking with you. You listen to Community Voice. We're up on the last break of the program. Well, I can say bye-bye. Okay. Well, let me do this. Let me thank Ms. Diane Milner. Let me thank President Clarence Nicholas. Debo, thank you. Carvey, thank you. Nate, thank you, sir. Good Lord willing, Creek don't rise. Hope to talk to everybody tomorrow. And as always, go from this place in peace.